If you are building any complex workflows or tools for many users to use in Coda, it might be useful to use different layouts when creating pages via buttons or having different views of the same data. And that's especially practical and useful if you're using centralized databases that have many columns, but the columns depend on the use case of the table that you're using. And so in this video, we're looking at everything you need to know about table layouts in Coda, how you can use them in views, how they apply to different views, and how you can also manipulate the layout that is used when someone clicks a button to create a new row from anywhere in your Coda doc. Let's get into it. Let's say we have a projects table in our Coda doc, and we know that we use this projects table to track both internal projects like operations, finance projects, marketing projects, and also client projects. So while we centralize the data in one single table, because in this case, a project is a project, whether it be for a client or internal, it is the same thing. So it's a good idea to centralize things in one single table. But we do know that for client projects, we need to see some columns that are not really relevant for internal projects, like the budget, for example, or revenue and expenses. So let's look at how we can set up different layouts depending on what projects we are looking at and what view of those projects we are looking at. Here is the projects table. And the first thing to know is that if I hit new, the first time after I create this table, the layout is going to be the default. And by layout in Coda, I mean this view here. That's what is called the layout. And the default layout shows all the columns that are displayed in your table view in the same order. So that's the default. And oftentimes in life, you want to change the default. Otherwise, you just go with what's given to you. But you can actually influence the default. And that's the case with Coda layouts as well. So to change a layout and to create one or multiple layouts, I can click on the three dots on any expanded Coda row. And then here you can see there is pick a different layout. For now, we only have the default one. But if I do edit layout, this would create a new layout because default is always present and we can always go back to that if need be. But now let's create a layout for client projects. And I'm going to name it client project layout to make it clear what this layout is for. And now on the right hand side panel, I can customize what this looks like, how columns are arranged, which columns are shown or hidden, and also some other controls. There are some quick styles here where I can quickly arrange the columns in certain fashions. Let's go to the main one here. I can hide the hidden columns. Otherwise, it will show this drop-down menu that people can expand to see what columns are existing in that table but are actually hidden in the layout that they're looking at. I can allow or disallow comments within a row, and I can also show or hide column descriptions which are on each column here. So first, let's drag and drop a few things to make a bit of a layout here and also hide some columns. The first thing that I want to do is, let's say the project name is a bit too big for me. So I'm going to go and do H2, so it's a bit smaller. Then I'm going to have the project status here, the project type. I know that we use this column as a way to mark what type of project that is. And because this is the client layout, I know that this is going to always be client. So I actually don't need to see the project type. I'm going to hide it from this layout. And there is the start date, there is the end date, and the priority level, which I can drop above there next to the project status. There is a show description. There is a canvas column for notes, free notes. Then there are revenue, there is costs, and there is the profit that is automatically calculated based on revenue minus costs, and that's the profit. And I know that these things are relevant for client projects, but they're not really relevant for internal projects. So we're going to hide them from the next layout that we are creating. For now, this is the client project layout looks like, and I'm satisfied with it at the moment. So I'm going to hit done. Now, you will see when I expand this row now, I have the client project layout displayed here, used in this view, because now I've set it in one row, and so it will apply on this table whenever I add a new row automatically. I can only change it manually, and if I do use default, I'm going to open the previous row here, and this one as well uses the default. So you can see how the layout is set at the table view level. And when I change it on a specific row within a table view, that changes across the entire table view. And I say table view because we can have multiple views of a table in Coda, and each table view can have a different layout. That's how we can create multiple layouts, and we can define what layout we want to use in a specific view. Now let's go back to sandbox page here, and we know this is the projects table. We are now using the client layout. Let's create a different layout for internal projects. So let's say maybe this is a doc where we track all the projects, and we might have a new page that shows only internal projects. And for this one, let's go full width here to make sure the table view shows up properly. And then I'm going to do /table, and that will select the projects table. That's an existing one. I'm going to rename this as internal projects. Now, if I open this one, I will see that the client project layout is used, but actually I want to create a different layout for internal projects. So I'm going to do edit layout. I'm actually duplicating this to create a copy, and I'm going to name this internal project layout. Now for internal projects, I want to see the project name, the status, the priority, start and end date. I don't want to see the client name really, so I'm going to hide this. I do want a short description. I do not need the revenues. I do not need costs. I do not need profit, and I do need project type. So I'm going to do this. Maybe drag it at the top right there. I'm going to hide the column links and select done. Now here I can switch the layout to the internal project layout that shows me the columns that I need. Okay. I'm going to also filter here to show only the projects where the project type does not contain client. I do not want client projects. So we'll know that if, for example, this one here is a client project, it will disappear from this view. This one as well, let's say this is a client project and disappears. Now let's create a new project here in the internal projects view here, which I can also hide, by the way. Table title, hide. Then I'm going to hit new, and you can see that now we are using the internal project layout. So the project name would be internal project X, just for testing purposes. The status, let's say in progress, we have a priority here. The project type is operations. I can set a start date, end date, short description, which can also be generated by AI if you have it in your Coda workspace, and then have a notes canvas column here for free text. So now this project shows up here. If I expand the row, I will see we are using the internal project layout. But now if I go back to the previous page in the doc called sandbox, where we have the projects table, if I expand project B, it is using the client layout, as you can see here, because that's what I set before. So that's what it's using. So you can see how layouts are view dependent. On each table view that you have, you can select a different layout that you want to use. Now, let's look at how we can actually create a button that adds a new row to a table or a table view and uses a specific layout within that table. To do that, we can create a new button, and this will be a add row button here, just to simplify things. Then we can select the target table, and you can see that here we can select either a table, meaning the source table, or a view of a table that is symbolized by this link icon here. That's a view of the projects table, and that's why it has the link here. So if I select adding a row to internal projects, I know that the internal projects layout will be used automatically because that's the layout that I'm using in the view. So I can also set values here to pre-populate them when someone clicks this button. So I can do, for example, I know that the project type will be operations by default, but then the person can change it. I want to make sure the row is opened for editing, and I can call this add a internal project. Now let's make it larger, and in here I can rename it. That's good practice in my experience. And internal project. Okay, now as a user, if I come here and I click this button, this will add a new project. And I can see the type is operations, but if I want, I can change it here. And now it shows up here. And so if I open it, I still have that same internal project layout that I want. Now, let's assume that we want to add this row to the source table and we want to apply a specific layout that's not the default one that we use in the source table. The way we can do that is using a formula here, and we do add row to the projects table, and then we want to add an additional action that is open row, and you can see that open row takes the row to open, which is the one that we just added, and then we can specify the view or the layout and the view mode. So you can see here the parameters that we can input, and one of the parameters that we can input is the view or the layout that we want to use. So we can open row, the new row added, comma, which view or layout do we want to use? You can see here we have a few options. I can select internal projects to make sure that we actually use the internal projects layout. If instead I want to use the client project layout, I can select projects because that's the layout in that table view. So I can play around with my layouts like so. So if I select internal projects, we're going to use that view. And then the view mode will be either model, full screen, center, or right. Now let's do model, for example. I'm going to hit enter. There's an error. There is unknown reference here. Let's try quotation marks. Looks good. And if I add a project, this opens up the centered view model, and it is using the internal projects layout. So I'm going to delete. Now let's try one last thing, changing this to the projects table. And then if I hit this, you will now see this is using the client project layout. And you can see here from the revenue, the cost, the profit that are present. And that's how you can play around with layouts in Coda tables within views of tables, as well as using buttons that add new rows to those tables.